Good evening. If you would open your Bibles to Matthew chapter 5, we're going to be camped out there for most of the sermon this evening. Matthew chapter 5. If you're a member here, then you are aware of Warren's and I's preaching arrangement. The way that I kind of explain it to people is that Warren majors in the pulpit and minors in the community classes, and I'm the other way around. And if I remember correctly, when I first met with the elders and agreed to work with this congregation, I think I actually remember telling them that I didn't care if I got up here and talked at all, as long as they could find somebody for me to sit across the table from. That's where I want to be, and as much as I love standing up here before you all, that's really where my heart is. And many of you have done that with me. Many of you have seen me do that. Many of you have attended the evangelism workshop that we did a while back, and you're kind of aware of the general approach that I take in those kinds of settings. But you know, just like everything else, every other thing that we do in our lives, as we learn and as we meet more people and we are made aware of more situations and more problems in people's lives, our approach starts to change, and we start to refine things and hopefully get better at what we do. And so tonight, I thought that it might be helpful to share one of the lessons that I like to do with people in order to help them understand their need for a relationship with God and what goes into having a relationship with God so that they might be saved. And in all of my studies that I have with people, there's one question that comes up more than anything else. And that's the question, is this a salvation issue? The first time that I had this question asked to me, I remember it very clearly because it kind of panicked me. I was in high school, and one of my friends had me over so that I could study with her dad. And her dad was actually an elder in the Christian church there in St. James, and we were studying about a lot of different things, mostly had to do with authority. And the topic came up of instrumental music, which Warren mentioned this morning as something that a lot of people don't understand why we do it the way that we do. And so we were talking about it, and I kind of explained where I was coming from, and he came to an agreement with me about what he thought the Scriptures taught about the way that we ought to worship God. But then the question came, but is it a salvation issue? And that kind of threw me. It was kind of hard for me to think on that plane. It sure would be easy if the Bible was divided up a little bit differently than it is, wouldn't it? It would be easy if there were just these lists, and it was like, here's the things you have to do, here's the things you don't have to, or that you're not supposed to do, and here's the things that you really should do, but you can get away with not doing them. That would be pretty easy for us, wouldn't it? And sometimes I wish that that's the way that it was. But I think there's a lot of value that comes from having to think a little bit harder. And I think that that's why God does things the way that He does as He communicates His will to us. And from there on, you know, I got asked that question more and more, and the more that I thought about that question, I was thinking about how that's not really a question that I ought to have. That's not really the question I ought to be asking. If I have the relationship with God that I'm reading in the Bible that He wants me to have with Him, then that's not where my focus should be. And I want to show you tonight why I came to that conclusion as we study briefly the Sermon on the Mount. In Matthew chapter 5, and I want to begin reading in verse 1. And as we read this, we're not going to comment a whole lot here on the first section that I'm going to read, but I want us to recognize that what it is talking about is it's descriptive of the character traits that a true disciple ought to have. And that's going to inform the way that we read the rest of this sermon. And so beginning in, actually I want to read beginning in verse 3, It says, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they shall be filled. Blessed are the merciful, for they shall obtain mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called sons of God. Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are you when they revile and persecute you and say all kinds of evil things against you falsely for my name's sake. Rejoice and be exceedingly glad, for great is your reward in heaven. For so they persecuted the prophets who were before you. You are the salt of the earth. But if the salt loses its flavor, how shall it be seasoned? It is then good for nothing but to be thrown out and trampled underfoot by men. You are the light of the world. A city that is set on a hill cannot be hidden, nor do they light a lamp and put it under a basket, but on a lampstand, and it gives light to all who are in the house. Let your light so shine before men that they see your good works and glorify your Father in heaven." We read these qualities that true disciples ought to have and how they ought to influence others. And that's how Jesus starts his sermon. But I think the real thesis statement, if you will, of the sermon is the verse that Charlie read for us a few minutes ago in verse 20, where it says, "I say to you that unless your righteousness exceeds the righteousness of the scribes and Pharisees, you will by no means enter the kingdom of heaven." You see, the idea of righteousness that these Pharisees had, the religious leaders of the time had nothing to do with the qualities we just read about. Their idea of righteousness was about outward actions, but they missed the heart lessons that those outward actions were supposed to lead to. And so that's the first point, I think, in Jesus' Sermon on the Mount, is that they were missing the principles for the rules. They understood the outward things, but they missed the inward things. And that's something that we ought to understand if we are going to be true disciples. So if you look in verse 21 beginning, it says, "You have heard that it was said to those of old, 'You shall not murder,' and whoever murders will be in danger of the judgment. But I say to you that whoever is angry with his brother without a cause shall be in danger of the judgment. And whoever says to his brother, 'Raca,' shall be in danger of the council. But whoever says, 'You fool,' shall be in danger of hellfire." And so what we should understand from this is that the Pharisees, the religious leaders of the time, they understood that you shouldn't go around killing people. That's pretty easy to understand. But they were okay with hating people. And they were okay with calling people names. And they were okay with even wanting someone dead. As long as you don't cross the line that is drawn in the sand, you're okay, was their message. Well, they had the same attitude towards their marriages. In verse 27, it says, you have heard it said to those of old, 'You shall not commit adultery.' But I say to you that whoever looks at a woman to lust after her has already committed adultery with her in his heart. If your right eye causes you to sin, pluck it out and cast it from you. For it is more profitable for you that one of your members perish than for your whole body to be cast out into hell. And if your right hand causes you to sin, cut it off and cast it away from you. For it is more profitable for you that one of your members should perish than for your whole body to be cast into hell." And so they understood that, you can't go around sleeping with people that you're not married to. That's pretty easy to understand. But it's okay to fantasize about those things, they said. And it's okay to wish that you could do those things. It's okay to look at other men and other women that you are not married to and have those thoughts. And Jesus shows us how serious of an offense this is in the heart. He says it would be better if you had outward pain. It would be better if you lost a part of your body than if you have these thoughts. It is worth going through some pain in order to not have this kind of heart. In verse 33, It says again, you have heard that it was said to those of old, you shall not swear falsely, but you shall perform your oaths to the Lord. But I say to you, do not swear at all, neither by heaven, for it is God's throne, nor by the earth, for it is his footstool, nor by Jerusalem, for it is the city of the great king. Nor shall you swear by your head, because you cannot make one hair white or black. But let your yes be yes, and your no, no. For whatever is more than these is from the evil one. So I think the principle here that we ought to learn is that the Pharisees, they believed that they had to be honest, but that only applied if they were making an oath. And maybe even the idea is that you couldn't outright lie, but you could be deceptive. And Jesus is saying, no, the principle is honesty. The principle is transparency, that you really say what you really mean, and that's enough, and that people understand your character, that you're going to do what you say you're going to do, and that should be enough. What we find when we are looking at these laws is that when they are properly applied, they don't just change people's behavior. They change people's hearts. Or maybe another way to say that is that when I have the attitude of just following the rules, that changes what I do. But if I have the idea that I'm going to learn the principles behind the rules, that changes who I am. The more humble I will become as I learn to turn the other cheek. The more merciful I will become as I learn to not harbor hate in my heart for people who have wronged me. The more able to be faithful to my through persecution. The more faithful I will be able to be through persecution as I practice faithfulness in my marriage. These different relationships that it talks about teach us about the relationship that we ought to have with God. The more pure in heart that I will be as I learn to be more honest with my words. That is what makes me the light of the world, if I am practicing these principles. It's not just the outward actions. What makes someone the light of the world, what makes them the salt of the earth, is not just the things that they are doing. It is who they are. It is the influence they are able to have because they are being transformed through their obedience. Their life is changing to make them reflective of Christ. That brings us into chapter 6, where Jesus talks about how these people were doing the right things, but they were doing them for the wrong reasons. And so in chapter 6 and verse 1, he says, "Take heed that you do not do your charitable deeds before men to be seen by them, otherwise you will have no reward from your Father in heaven. Therefore, when you do a charitable deed, do not sound a trumpet before you, as the hypocrites do in the synagogues and in the streets, that they might have glory from men. Assuredly, I say to you, they have their reward. But when you do a charitable deed, do not let your left hand know what your right hand is doing, that your charitable deed may be done in secret, and that your Father who sees in secret will himself reward you." And so we ought not to do our charitable deeds to be seen by men. It's interesting to me, as we go through this, we see a pattern that Jesus says, these people who are doing these things for the wrong reasons, they have their reward. The reason that they are doing these things, that's going to be fulfilled for them. They're doing these charitable deeds so that people will see them and think, wow, those are really good people. And Jesus is saying, people are going to look at those men and they're going to say, wow, these are really good people. But God's not going to do that. And that's the relationship that we ought to be worried about, concerned with. And so he goes on and he says, if you're doing this for the wrong reasons, you're not going to have a reward from your Father in heaven, is what it says in verse 1. That I am not concerned with that kind of reward as a disciple. I'm not going to hide my good works. We saw in chapter 5, it says that we want people to see our good works and glorify God, right? But we don't want to be seen for the sake of being seen. We don't want to be seen so that people look at us. I'm not going to hide the fact that I'm doing some good things, but I'm not going to post a picture on Facebook either that says, look at me. The reward I am concerned with is something else. Verse 5, it says, when you pray, do not be like the hypocrites, for they love to pray standing in the synagogues and on the corners of the streets, that they might be seen by men. Assuredly, I say to you, they have their reward. But you, when you pray, go into your room, that when you have shut your door, pray to your Father who is in the secret place, and your Father who sees in secret will reward you. And when you pray, do not use vain repetitions as the heathen do, for they think they will be heard for their many words. Therefore, do not be like them, for your Father knows the things that you have need of before you ask them. Well, does that mean that we don't pray in restaurants? Well, of course not. That's not the point. It means that our motivation is not that we will be seen by men. We aren't in this for people. We aren't in this for reputation. But the people who are in this for reputation will have their reward. They might have that good reputation. That's just not what I'm concerned with as a disciple. In verse 16, we talk about fasting. It says, moreover, when you fast, do not be like the hypocrites with a sad countenance, for they disfigure their faces that they might appear to men to be fasting. Assuredly, I say to you, they have their reward. But you, when you fast, anoint your head and wash your face, so that you do not appear to men to be fasting, but to your Father who is in the secret place, and your Father who sees in secret will reward you. I've said many times that I think Christians ought to be talking a lot more about fasting, that this is a practice that we don't really encourage enough, I don't think. It's not something that's commanded at any specific times, but there are plenty of examples of people fasting in the Old Testament and the New Testament. It's something that Jesus here is assuming that his followers are going to be participating in. But again, the question is, why should we do it? And again, this is not something that we need to guard like it's a nuclear code. This isn't something that is a secret. It just shouldn't be advertised. We should treat fasting the same way that we treated prayer in the context. Some people might contort their faces, and they might talk about how much their stomach's growling, and they might just talk about how awful it is, and look how much I'm willing to sacrifice, and look how much I'm willing to go through in order to sacrifice for God. And Jesus says those people are going to have their reward. People will look at them, and they will say, wow, isn't that great? What a cool guy. But our reward is something else. What is our reward? Verse 19 says, do not lay up for yourselves treasures on earth where moth and rust destroy, where thieves break in and steal. But lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven where neither moth nor rust destroys, where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. The reward that we are concerned with is nothing physical. Those things are temporary. They will fade away into nothing. You can read the book of Ecclesiastes, and you can see how it says that everyone's going to forget your name eventually. Everybody's going to forget everything that you have ever done. All your stuff is going to belong to somebody else. All your work is eventually going to come to nothing, but your relationship to God, it stays there, whether that's a good thing or a bad thing. And all of this should show us that even if we are doing the right things, even if we are doing all of the right things all of the time, if we are doing them for the wrong reasons, it's not going to take us to the place where we need to go. We can't do these things just because people want us to, just because we want people to think highly of us, or in the Pharisees' case, because it is the source of their money, power, and status. This is about God. And that takes us to Matthew 7. What this is all about is just submitting to the Lord. So in verse 21, we're just going to read verse 21 through 27 from this chapter. It says, not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, shall enter the kingdom of heaven, but he who does the will of my Father in heaven. Many will say to me in that day, Lord, Lord, have we not prophesied in your name, and cast out demons in your name, and done many wonders in your name? And I will declare to them, I never knew you. Depart from me, you who practice lawlessness. Therefore, whoever hears these sayings of mine and does them, I will liken him to a wise man who built his house on the rock. And the rain descended, and the floods came, and the winds blew, and beat on that house, and it did not fall, for it was founded on the rock. But everyone who hears these sayings of mine and does not do them will be like a foolish man who built his house on the sand, and the rain descended, and the floods came, and the winds blew, and beat on that house, and it fell, and great was its fall. You know, if we just read that out of context, we can come away with the same understanding of the rules that the Pharisees had. We could come away with the understanding that all we have to do is just do all the things, right? Well, there are some people that go the other way, and they look at the rest of the Sermon on the Mount out of context, and they come away with the lesson, see, it's really just all about the heart. And so you don't have to follow the rules. It doesn't really matter as long as you have love. And as long as you have your heart right, you don't have to have the outward obedience. But Jesus says, he never says not to follow the rules. What he says is that the rules are supposed to get your heart where it needs to be. Your heart cannot be right if you don't follow the rules. But following the rules is supposed to take us somewhere. So you notice verse 21 and 22 that there are some people who they're doing all of the things and they are submitting in their words by calling Jesus Lord, but they still didn't make the cut. What was the basis of getting in? Verse 23, Jesus says, I never knew you. This was about a relationship. This was about knowing Jesus and being known by Jesus. But we can't get there by only focusing on outward obedience, and we also can't get there without outward obedience. We must use the commands of Jesus to make us humble servants. And we must develop our hearts through these actions to give us the character that he wants us to have, that it's described at the beginning of his Sermon on the Mount. And once we understand that, we should know what the goal is. The goal is not to follow some sort of outward routine in our lives. The goal is not to make people look at us and think, wow, what a great guy. The goal is to know Jesus and to be known by Jesus and to reflect Jesus in our character as lights in the world. And when we understand that this is the goal, it should change the way that we think about our relationship with God. It isn't transactional, where we just have to keep performing these actions and then God will bless me. It's relational, where I have to develop a deep allegiance in my heart to God. And that is what is going to inform my outward actions. And as before we close, I want to mention just a few passages that I've talked about very recently, but that have been very helpful to me and to others that I have worked with recently who struggle with this in their lives. The first one's in Romans 6. Really, as far as where we're going to be turning, it's just Romans 6. We know what verses 3 and 4 says about baptism and what happens there, that this is an outward action, and it explains what is happening in that action to us, to our sin as a result of our obedience. But Paul goes on to say that what is really happening relationally between us and God is that we are submitting ourselves to Him as slaves. And so if you drop down to verse 16, it says, do you not know that to whom you present yourselves slaves to obey, you are that one slaves whom you obey, whether of sin leading to death or of obedience leading to righteousness? But God be thanked that though you were slaves of sin, yet you obeyed from the heart that form of doctrine to which you were once delivered. And having been set free from sin, you became slaves of righteousness. He says, I speak in human terms because of the weakness of your flesh. For just as you presented your members as slaves of uncleanness and of lawlessness, leading to more lawlessness, so now present your members as slaves of righteousness for holiness. Now, I can't remember if it was Perry or Allen that said to me earlier today, they called me a perfectionist. And in some ways that isn't true. Don't ask my wife about my ability to keep my closet clean at home. But in some ways it is true. I struggle feeling like I have to be perfect all the time. And I know a lot of people here have that struggle. And I'm not perfect all the time, which is oftentimes I'm not perfect. And that can get pretty discouraging for me. Now don't misunderstand what I'm trying to say. Don't misunderstand me to think that it's okay to go on living in habitual sin after we have given our lives to Christ or anything like that. There's nothing needs to be done about that. But when we have the mindset that our salvation is all about the boxes that we check, that it's all about the outward actions, that can be a very daunting task. It is easy to feel like we have to be perfect all the time. Or it's easy for new Christians to feel like they have to be perfect right away. Or it's easy for people who are considering becoming Christians that they might put the cart before the horse and they might think they have to be perfect and then they can become a Christian. I've seen that happen quite a few times. And the reality is that you're never going to be perfect in this life. I'm not perfect. Warren's not perfect. The elders aren't perfect. Warren's a Longhorns fan. Perry's a Cubs fan. But it isn't about perfect obedience. It's not about perfect execution of the outward actions. It's about perfect allegiance to Christ. And that changes some things. There are some ways in which this is actually a much higher calling. Because if I understand this to be about a relationship of submission, then that means that it isn't just about the rules. It isn't just about the things that Jesus has even spoken about. But I have to care about the rules, and I have to care about a whole lot more than just the rules. I have to care about thinking deeper than the rules, to where the principles are leading me, the kind of character that I ought to have. I have to think about what is best for Jesus instead of what is best for me. How should I spend my time? Where should I live, and what job should I have where I can be the most effective worker in the kingdom? How should I spend my money? What kinds of shows and music and art am I indulging in, and how is that going to affect me? How is that going to affect my friends and my family? You know, the answers to those questions might not always be a matter of something that Jesus has commanded outright. There might be some different acceptable answers to those questions for different people in different situations. But our goal in asking the questions is that we are here to serve our Master. And we need to ask those questions if we are concerned with His will over our own. And so understanding this to be a matter of relationship rather than just outward actions, that's going to elevate our conversations quite a bit. We're going to be thinking on a different plane. And we're going to be thinking about a lot more things. Colossians chapter 3 and verse 17 says, when it's describing the character of the new man, it says, whatever you do, in word or deed, do all in the name of the Lord Jesus, giving thanks to God the Father through Him. And so there's a lot of ways where this can actually raise the playing field. But there's also some other ways where it actually takes quite a bit of the pressure off. Because I don't have to be perfect. And that's really good news for me. Do I have to be concerned with the rules? Absolutely. Do I have to do my best to follow them? Yes, I do. But if I step out of bounds every once in a while, is this the end of my relationship with Christ? Not if I continue to submit to Him. Not if I repent. Not if I continue working on this relationship. I illustrate it like this. If I am Warren's slave, shame on him, and you're going to get canceled for that. But if I am Warren's slave, and he commands me to cook him eggs for breakfast every morning, am I always going to get his eggs cooked exactly the way that he likes them? Probably not. But does that change the fact that I am his slave and he is my master? When I start out my time as Warren's slave, I'm probably going to mess up a little bit more often, aren't I? Too runny one day, burnt the next. I might not be the best slave for Warren at first. But after a while, if I continue to show allegiance to my master, and if I continue to try to make the best eggs that I can for Warren, and if I care really deeply about our relationship and I want him to have what he wants, then eventually I'm going to get pretty good at making eggs. And I might mess up every now and then, even after I've been doing it for a while, I might mess up every now and again. But if I'm going to continue to show allegiance to my master, and I'm going to try to do my best to do what is pleasing to him, I have room to mess up. And I have room to grow, but I'm still submitting to my master. And when we have that mindset about our relationship with God, what should happen is we should start thinking a lot more about how to be pleasing to God and a lot less about what we can get away with doing. And then the kinds of questions that we are asking are going to start to change. Is this a salvation issue? That's a question that is concerned with what I can get away with doing. What must I do to be saved? It's a reframing of the same question, but that was the question of a lot of people through the stories of evangelism in the New Testament church. Those people, they may have been concerned about not going to hell. I'll tell you that I was very concerned about that when I got baptized. But more than that, they were convicted of their sin, and they became willing to do whatever it took in order to repair their relationship with God. And that's where we want to be. That's where we want you to be this evening. If there's anything that we can do to help you in your relationship to God, to repair it and get it to what it ought to be, please make your needs known. Come forward or find me after services. Let's stand and sing.